Hello everyone. Who didn't know I have a PlayStation 5 for 1000 subscribers on my channel? I had great parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was really little because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course I always sleep on the couch because Nick at Night made me try. Yes, one night I wake up from a tingling sensation. It was like an instinct. I just took a sitting position and looked out the front window. We lived in the countryside of Georgia, so you can imagine the scale of the trees. In the perfect light cast from the moon, I see the silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog rushes to the window and growls through the glass. Frightened, I run to my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something protective and rushes outside with the dogs to wax the hothead. I tremble in my mom's arms until my dad comes home and tells me that he hasn't seen anyone and that we should go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I tell my sister what happened. Dad regularly walks around the house with a cup of coffee. We all stand still, and I finally think, I can sleep now. But no. I notice a man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me the shush signal and runs away. He just turns around to run in a straight line. I swear I couldn't stop crying for hours. Growing up, my parents were amazing. They let me crash in the living room on weekend nights because my sister was a light sleeper, and I was a little night owl who wanted to soak up as much TV as possible. There was something magical about curling up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, letting the soft glow of Nick at Night lull me into sleep. I was convinced I'd pull an all-nighter every time, but without fail, I'd always knock out before dawn. One night, though, things got weird. I woke up with a jolt. Not from a sound, not from a nightmare, just this weird, tingling instinct. My body sat up before my brain caught up, and my eyes immediately locked onto the front window. We lived out in the countryside of Georgia, where the trees were massive, their shadows stretching long and eerie in the moonlight. And in that perfect silver glow, I saw it. A silhouette. High up in the tree. Too high for comfort. At first, my groggy brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weirdly shaped branch? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me? But then the family dog, a big OL lab mix, charged the window and let out a deep, guttural growl. The kind I'd never heard from him before. That was all the confirmation I needed. I sprinted to my parents' room, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I woke them up in a frantic mess of words. There's someone outside. In the tree. I saw them. Dad didn't even hesitate. He grabbed something from the nightstand, something protective, and stormed outside, the dog on his heels. Mom pulled me close, rubbing my back while I shook in her arms. We waited. Minutes dragged on like hours until finally, Dad came back inside. Nothing, he said. Checked all around. No footprints. Nothing in the tree. You must have been dreaming. I wanted to believe him. Desperately. But I knew what I saw. Still, I let him tuck me into my actual bed that night, back in my room where my sister snored softly, oblivious to my terror. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, trying to convince myself it was all just my imagination. Then I saw it. A figure. Standing outside my bedroom window. At first, I couldn't move. My body just refused to function. My breath hitched, my stomach dropped, and my mind screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. The moonlight cast just enough glow for me to make out his shape tall, thin, and still as a statue. And then, as if knowing I had seen him, he lifted a hand to his lips. Shoo! I lost it. I screamed so loud that my sister shot up in bed beside me, confused and groggy. My dad's heavy footsteps pounded down the hall before he burst into the room, wild-eyed and ready for war. What? What happened? I pointed, still gasping for breath, but the window was empty. The man was gone. Dad didn't hesitate. He stormed outside again, this time yelling threats into the darkness, flashlight cutting through the shadows as the dog went berserk, barking at nothing. My mom held me tight, trying to calm me down, but I could tell by her trembling hands that she was scared too. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Dad finally came back inside, locking the door behind him. "Nothing," he said again, but this time, his voice was tense, uncertain. "Go back to sleep. I'll be up for a while." Like hell I was going to sleep. I stayed curled up in my bed, heart racing, eyes darting to the window every few seconds. Somehow, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep. But I do remember waking up to the sound of tapping on the glass. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but it sent a jolt of terror straight through me. A slow, deliberate tapping against the glass. My breath hitched, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop. Maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe it was just a branch scraping against the window in the wind. Tap. 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 No wind. No branches. Just that sound, precise and rhythmic, like a signal meant only for me. I forced myself to open my eyes, though every part of me screamed not to. The window was right there, barely 3 feet from my bed. At first, I didn't see anything. The pale glow of the moon cast long shadows against the walls, making everything in the room feel stretched and unnatural. But then, movement. A hand. A pale, ghostly hand, slowly retreating from the glass. I choked on a scream and scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed. My sister stirred beside me, murmuring something in her sleep, but she didn't wake up. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to look again. The hand was gone. But beyond the window, just at the tree line, a figure stood. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of his body, tall and thin, eerily still. The same figure from before. My stomach clenched as an icy wave of fear washed over me. Run! Get Dad! But I couldn't move. It was like my limbs had turned to stone. I wanted to scream, to wake up the whole house, but the fear had its claws in my throat, strangling the sound before it could escape. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me through the darkness. And then, slowly, his hand lifted again. Shoo! I gasped and launched myself out of bed, my legs finally obeying me. I tore out of the room, my feet barely touching the floor as I sprinted down the hall. I didn't even have to yell. Dad was already up, standing in the living room with the front door slightly ajar, his eyes scanning the yard. "What is it?" he demanded, turning to face me. I pointed toward my room, gasping for breath. "He's back," I finally managed. "Outside my window." Dad didn't hesitate. He grabbed his shotgun from the corner, threw open the front door, and stormed onto the porch. The dogs, already on edge, took off into the yard, barking wildly. I clung to the doorway, my body trembling as I watched him scan the darkness. Nothing. No movement. No figure. But the footprints, those were new. Deep impressions in the dirt, leading away from my window toward the trees. Dad's jaw clenched as he stepped off the porch, following them with slow, measured steps. I wanted to call him back, to tell him not to go any further, but my voice was lost to fear. He reached the tree line and stopped. The dogs circled, noses to the ground, growling low in their throats. And then, the smell hit me. Rotten. Damp. Like something old and decaying, something that had been left out in the elements for far too long. My stomach twisted, and I covered my nose with my sleeve. Dad turned back toward me, his face pale even in the moonlight. "Go inside," he said firmly. "Now." I didn't argue. I rushed back in, locking the door behind me. My hands were still shaking as I pressed my back against the wall, listening for the sound of Dad's footsteps returning. Minutes passed. The dogs barked a few more times, then fell eerily silent. Finally, Dad came back in, his expression unreadable. He locked the door behind him, double-checking it before turning to me. "Did you see his face?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. Dad exhaled through his nose, gripping the shotgun a little tighter. "Go wake your mother." That was the moment I realized he was scared too. Mom sat at the kitchen table, gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. The dim light cast long shadows on the walls, making the house feel smaller, more claustrophobic. She hadn't said much since waking up, just listening as Dad quietly explained what had happened. Finally, she looked up at me. "You're sure you saw someone?" I nodded. "Twice. First in the tree, then outside my window." Dad ran a hand over his face, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't find anyone out there," he admitted. "But those footprints. Could they have been from earlier?" Mom asked, though she didn't sound convinced. Dad shook his head. "No. They were fresh. Whoever it was, they were just here." The realization made my stomach churn. Whoever had been watching me was still close by. Maybe even watching us now. A sharp knock at the door made all three of us jump. The dogs, who had been lying at Dad's feet, bolted upright, barking furiously. Dad grabbed his shotgun again and moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. He relaxed, just slightly, before unlocking the door and pulling it open. "Tom," he greeted the man outside. "What are you doing here this late?" Tom was our neighbor, living a few acres down the road. He was an older man, with graying hair and a lined face that always looked serious. Tonight, though, he looked more than serious. He looked worried. "Saw your lights on," Tom said, stepping inside. "Figured I should check in." He glanced at me, then back at Dad. "You seen anything strange tonight?" Dad hesitated. "Why?" Tom sighed and rubbed his neck. "Because about an hour ago, I saw someone standing at the edge of my property. Thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but my dog went nuts, just like yours are now. Then he was gone. Vanished into the woods." The room went completely silent. My skin prickled with cold fear. Dad and Tom exchanged a long look before Tom finally said, "I think someone's been watching our houses." A heavy silence settled over the room. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. Dad and Tom exchanged wary glances, and I could tell they were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't just some prank or coincidence. Someone was out there. Mom set her coffee down and stood, rubbing her arms as if warding off a chill. "Should we call the sheriff?" Dad hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. He'll come out, take a look, and by then, whoever it is will be long gone. We need to figure out what we're dealing with first." Tom grunted in agreement. "I don't like this, though. Whoever's out there isn't just passing through. They're watching." He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You're sure you didn't recognize anything about him?" I swallowed hard. I never saw his face. Just the outline, the way he moved. And that smell, I shuddered at the memory of it. It was awful, like something rotting. Tom's face darkened. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Damn it." Dad narrowed his eyes. "You know something." Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small flashlight from his coat pocket. "Come outside with me." Dad glanced at Mom, who looked like she wanted to protest, but she pressed her lips together and nodded. He grabbed his shotgun again, and after a second's hesitation, I followed them. I wasn't sure why I was terrified, but something in Tom's expression told me I needed to see whatever it was he wasn't saying. The night was eerily still. Even the crickets had gone silent, as if sensing something unnatural in the air. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as Tom led us past the porch, back toward my bedroom window. The footprints were still there, deep impressions in the dirt leading toward the trees. Tom crouched down, tracing a gloved finger along one of the prints. His frown deepened. "These are strange. Look at the shape." I stepped closer, peering down. The footprints were long, almost too long, and narrow. And then I noticed something else. "There's only 4 toes?" Dad stiffened. Tom muttered a curse under his breath. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom stood up, his face grim. "It means this isn't the first time I've seen tracks like these. A shiver ran down my spine. Where? Tom hesitated, then pointed toward the woods. Few miles out, near the old Miller farm. Back in the 80s, there were stories, folks talked about someone, or something, lurking out there. People went missing. Others swore they saw figures just beyond the tree line, watching. And always, the smell. I felt sick. What happened? Tom sighed. The stories just stopped. Folks moved away. The ones who stayed? They stopped talking about it. Dad tightened his grip on the shotgun. You think it's the same thing? Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly turned his flashlight toward the tree line. The beam illuminated the jagged branches, casting long shadows against the trunks. And then we saw it. A mark, carved deep into the bark of one of the trees. A symbol rough, almost haphazard, like it had been scratched in with something sharp. 3 vertical lines, intersected by a single diagonal slash. Tom exhaled sharply. Yep. Same damn thing. I stared at the symbol, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. What does it mean? Tom shook his head. Don't know. But every time I've seen it, something bad follows. The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves, and suddenly, I felt the overwhelming sensation of being watched. I turned sharply, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. Dad didn't waste another second. We're going inside. Now. No one argued. We hurried back toward the house, and as soon as we were inside, Dad locked the door behind us. Tom turned to him. I don't think this is just some trespasser. I think it's something worse. Dad nodded slowly. We need to be ready. Mom's face was pale, but she squared her shoulders. Then tell us what to do. Tom hesitated before answering, his voice low and serious. First, you don't go outside after dark. Second, if you hear tapping again, don't open your eyes. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What happens if I do? I asked. Tom met my gaze, and the look in his eyes chilled me to the bone. You don't want to find out. Sleep was impossible. Even after Tom left and Dad double-checked every lock in the house, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound I dreaded most. Tap. 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 But the night remained silent, save for the occasional rustling of the wind against the house. My sister slept soundly beside me, blissfully unaware of the terror lurking just outside our home. I envied her. At some point, exhaustion finally won, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But my dreams were dark, shadowy figures standing at the edge of the trees, eyes I couldn't see but somehow felt, watching me, waiting. I woke with a start, heart hammering. The room was still dark, but something was different. The air felt heavier, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. I strained my ears, holding my breath. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, telling myself it was just nerves. Just paranoia. Then came the whisper. So faint, I almost thought I imagined it. Shoo. I bolted upright, my blood turning to ice. My eyes darted to the window, expecting to see that hand again, that terrible pale hand pressing against the glass. But there was nothing there. Just the trees. Just the dark. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slid out of bed as quietly as I could. Every instinct screamed at me to wake Dad, to get out of this room, but something held me back. I crept toward the window, each step feeling like I was moving through water, heavy and slow. I reached it, hesitated, then peered outside. At first, I saw nothing. Just the same tree line, the same swaying branches. But then, movement. A flicker of motion at the base of one of the trees. My breath caught in my throat. The mark. The strange symbol we had found carved into the bark before it was glowing. A faint, pulsing light, like embers in the dark. Then something stepped in front of it. Tall. Thin. Unmoving. Watching. I stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My sister stirred, mumbling in her sleep. I didn't dare make another sound. I didn't dare take my eyes off the window. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, silhouetted by that eerie glow, its presence pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake. Then, slowly, its hand lifted again. Tap. 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 I squeezed my eyes shut, every fiber of my being screaming not to look. Don't open your eyes. I turned, sprinting out of the room and straight to my parents' bedroom. I didn't even knock, I just shoved the door open, my breath coming in short gasps. Dad! He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, shotgun in hand. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. Mom was up too, her eyes wide with fear. You saw it, Dad said. It wasn't a question. I nodded frantically. It was at the tree line. The mark, it was glowing. Mom sucked in a sharp breath. Dad stood, gripping the gun tighter. Get in the closet, he ordered Mom. Both of you. Now. Mom didn't argue. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the walk-in closet, shutting the door behind us. I could hear Dad moving through the house, locking windows, flipping off lights. Then, silence. A long, suffocating silence. And then. Tap. 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 Each strike against the window sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt paralyzed, caught in a vice of fear. The only thing I could do was press my back against the cool wall of the closet and hold my breath, praying the darkness outside wouldn't find us. The tapping stopped. For a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the eerie stillness of the house. The air felt thicker now, like something was waiting, watching. I could hear Dad moving through the house again, the soft shuffle of his footsteps in the hall. He was getting closer. The weight in the air lifted just slightly, and I dared to exhale quietly. Then the door creaked open. My heart jumped. I barely dared to peek around the edge of the closet door. But it wasn't Dad. It was something else. A shape, tall and thin, slipping into the room like a shadow. I froze. The figure's outline blurred in the dim light from the hallway. Its movement was slow, deliberate, like it knew we were hiding, like it was savoring the moment. I could hear it breathing, heavy, ragged. It wasn't the sound of a person, but something wrong. I clutched Mom's arm, her hand trembling against mine. I could feel her panic through the bone-tight grip she had on me. She looked down at me, her eyes wide with fear, silently pleading with me to stay quiet, to stay still. Tap. 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 The sound was closer now, like it was right outside the door. The figure had stopped moving, but I could feel its presence, standing there in the dark, watching us. Then, I heard a voice, low, raspy, like it had come from somewhere deep inside its chest. You shouldn't have looked. I didn't even understand what it meant, but the way it said it made my blood run cold. The figure shifted, moving again. I didn't dare look. I couldn't. The terror of seeing it was too much to bear. Suddenly, I heard Dad's voice in the hallway, sharp and demanding. Who's there? Come out. The figure's footsteps stopped immediately. For a moment, I thought it had vanished. But then came the sound of something scraping against the floor, the soft hiss of something dragging, moving closer. My breath hitched. It was too close. Too close. Mom stood up slowly, whispering in my ear, "Stay down. Don't make a sound." I held my breath, pressing myself further into the corner of the closet, trying to melt into the shadows, wishing I could disappear. But the thing didn't seem to notice. It kept moving closer, closer. The sound of its scraping steps echoed through the hallway, until it was at the door. A shadow passed beneath the crack in the closet door. Then, it stopped. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Suddenly, the door burst open. Dad! I screamed, my voice cracking. But it wasn't my dad standing there. It was the figure, towering over us, blocking the doorway, its face obscured by darkness. Before I could scream again, I felt something pull me back, out of the closet. I barely had time to process what was happening before I was yanked into Dad's arms. "Get down!" Dad shouted, shoving me toward the floor. The figure took a step forward, and just as it did, the lights flickered on. For a moment, everything went still. The figure was gone. The air felt lighter, less oppressive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for the right moment to come back. Dad moved quickly, slamming the closet door shut. "Stay here. Stay quiet," he ordered. Mom's voice trembled as she asked, "What now? What's happening?" Dad's eyes were wide, his face pale, but he was trying to stay composed. "We wait." The lights flickered again, then stayed steady. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched out, the kind that sits in your bones, making you question everything you thought you knew. The figure, whatever it was, wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right time. And I didn't know if we'd be ready for it. The silence in the room was deafening. Every minute stretched longer than the last, each second a reminder of the danger that still loomed just outside our door. I could hear my pulse thrumming in my ears, each beat quickening in time with my growing fear. It felt like everything in the house had gone still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mom was trembling beside me, her hand still gripping mine. I couldn't find words to comfort her, not when I was as terrified as she was. Dad stood by the door, his eyes darting to the windows, the shadows, every corner of the house, as though he was expecting the figure to appear again at any moment. He held the shotgun close, his knuckles white around the barrel, but his gaze kept flicking toward the hallway, scanning, searching for something, anything, that might give us some kind of clue about what was going on. Then came a sound, soft at first, barely perceptible. A whisper. "Shoo." It was faint, but I heard it as clearly as if it had been right next to me. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at Dad, but his face was set in grim determination. He'd heard it too. Without a word, he motioned for Mom and me to stay low, and he stepped toward the door, slowly, cautiously, as though every move could trigger something worse. The dogs were quiet now. Too quiet. I glanced back to where they had been, but they were nowhere to be seen. My stomach twisted with dread. Dad pushed the door open just a crack, his body blocking most of the space, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the dark hallway. The faintest flicker of movement caught his attention, and without warning, he stepped forward, shotgun raised. The figure was there. I saw it, just for a split second. A flash of it, standing in the doorway at the far end of the hallway, its silhouette like a nightmare, tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching us. And then it was gone. Vanished. "Dad!" I cried out, my voice cracking in panic. But Dad didn't hesitate. He was already moving toward the door, his eyes scanning the hallway as he walked forward. "Stay here," he ordered in a low, steady voice. He stepped out into the hallway, and for a moment, the house fell into complete stillness once more. The only sound was the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath Dad's boots. Mom and I sat frozen, barely breathing, waiting for the inevitable. Then we heard it. The unmistakable sound of something dragging across the floor. It wasn't the wind or a branch tapping at the window this time. This was real, and it was coming from the hallway, slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. The sound was heavy and unnatural, like something huge and otherworldly was making its way toward us. "Dad, no, don't go," I whispered urgently, my heart pounding. But I knew, deep down, it was already too late. In a flash, Dad was back in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. I saw it in his eyes, fear. True fear. He motioned for us to stay low again, to stay quiet, but I could feel my pulse racing faster than ever before. And then came the voice again, low and raspy, like it had come from somewhere deep in the darkness. "You shouldn't have looked." This time, it was close. Too close. I didn't have to turn to know it was standing right behind us. I turned to look at Mom, her face as pale as mine. The last of our hope was slipping away, leaving only terror in its wake. "Don't look. Don't," Dad began to say, but it was too late. The figure appeared in the doorway, its form towering over us. For a moment, all I could see was the darkness inside its outline, like a void that swallowed the light. Its hand reached toward us, long, bony fingers outstretched. And then there was a sharp, guttural sound like something ripping through the air, a scream that wasn't human, an inhuman howl that reverberated through the house. It shook the walls, rattled the windows, and sent a wave of nausea through my body. "Dad!" I screamed. But Dad didn't hesitate. He raised the shotgun and fired. The deafening blast shook the room, and for a brief moment, the figure recoiled, vanishing back into the shadows. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom, breathing heavily, pulled me close. I felt her trembling, but she didn't say a word. We stayed there, huddled together, as Dad stepped forward, scanning every corner of the house. His face was grim, but there was something different now. Something had changed. The figure was gone. For good. The next few hours were a blur. The sun had barely risen when Dad finally spoke. "We're leaving. All of us. Tonight." It wasn't a suggestion. We packed up what little we could, gathering our belongings in a frantic rush. The house, the one that had been our home, no longer felt safe. No amount of locks or shotguns would protect us from whatever was out there. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. The trees were still. The air was thick with tension, but the figure, the thing that had haunted us, was gone. But as we drove further down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching us, waiting. And though we had escaped, I knew one thing for certain: we would never truly be free. Not from the thing that had followed us, nor from the darkness it left behind. And as the distance grew, I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, we'd only just begun to understand the true nature of what we had seen.